Michael Binnion's our next speaker. He's truly a thought leader in the energy industry and in Alberta. He and a few of his friends are the founder of the Modern Miracle Network, and correct me if I'm wrong on what I'm saying here, but it's an amazing organization that's, I think it's fair to say that those of us who've relied on the energy industry have sort of assumed that we would be all right just because we were right. But what we found out, sort of much to our dismay and to our economic misfortune, is that the left have done a better job of spreading their lies than we've done of spreading the truth. And so Michael and the group started their Modern Miracle Network. That's how we met Germaine. Quite frankly, that's how I met Michael, was when he got involved with the Modern Miracle Network. And the oil industry, the energy industry's done an amazing job of getting oil from the depths of the earth and tar out of sand, but we haven't done as good a job of spreading that message. And I don't know if you're talking about that today, Michael, or if you're just talking about pipelines and how it's going to all bring it together. But I guess we'll let you talk, and then we'll know what you're going to talk about, won't we? So please welcome Michael Binnion.
Well, first I want to thank Germaine for his talk. There's one thing we love in Alberta. It's a Quebecer who speaks Albertan, and Germaine's one of those. And I tell you, I'm really happy to be here. It's a lot of friendly faces. I could spend all my time just having conversations. It's a great thing to get together at conferences like this and see so many fellow travelers. And I want to make a special mention Danny Hozak, who's just absolutely incredible and does so much to try to make a difference. And it's just, I find just always so amazing what you can accomplish if you combine being a genuinely nice person with genuinely caring about Canada. And that's Danny Hozak. I want to thank all of you, too, for being here and caring about Alberta and Canada to be at this conference. The title of my talk and the agenda is Pipelines That Bind. I'm on the Board of Governors of CAP, and I've been mentioning to Tim McMillan, our CEO and president there, that as this pipeline debate goes on, I said, you realize at some point in time you're going to have to actually talk about what's inside the pipeline, too, right? And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. It's bold conversations about the stuff that's in the pipeline, hydrocarbons. And so I'll start off with Michael Binnion. And I go to work every day, and I work on ending smog in China, dung cooking fires in India, waterborne disease in Africa, the need for equalization in Quebec, and First Nations poverty in Canada. My company, Questerre, produces a truly miraculous product that can do all of that. And life, I think, is just simply better with hydrocarbons. So I hope to answer 3 questions today. One is your life better with oil and gas? And 2 is, how did that ever become a question? And 3 is, what are we going to do about it? We're experiencing a change right now in markets where consumers have a competitive market where they have energy choices, more energy choices. And I think we're shifting to a market where the question is less, what will the demand for oil and gas be in 2030 and 2050, to more a question of what should the demand for oil and gas be in 2030 and 2050. And the answer to that question is going to depend more and more on politics and less on economics. So Modern Miracle Network was formed by citizens. We want to have an adult conversation on our energy choices. And we have an all-of-the-above approach. We're pro-renewables. But at the same time, we think it's time to stop comparing the benefits of one kind of energy to the impacts of another. Because after all, every grade 3 student knows that a benefit is better than an impact. And it turns out all energy, even renewables, have some fairly serious impacts. And it also turns out that hydrocarbons have benefits, actually truly miraculous benefits for the human condition. And who in their right mind would want to ban a modern miracle? So in adult conversation, we would compare the costs and the benefits of each of our choices to put the best energy in its best place to create a better balanced energy diet. You're there already. Good. Okay, so in that conversation, the strategic goals of our network is we want to create an ecosystem of dozens of public voices and thousands of private voices to build a national network, and it's to change the narrative from everybody knows that oil is dirty to that everybody knows that Canadians are the best in the world at resource development and that oil and gas actually makes people's lives better, not just here, but around the world. We want to promote a global approach to climate policy, that we look at what our impacts are on global emissions, not just what our impacts are on local emissions, because we think Canada does a lot to reduce emissions around the world with our better standards. We want to bring to light the hypocrisy of the leave it in the ground movement. Ultimately, we want to get pipelines, LNG plants, and Canada moving again. In the end, the ecosystem, it's you. We're trying to build an ecosystem of people like you. There's public voices in this room, there's private voices in this room, and we want to get to the point where we can win this culture war on oil and gas and hopefully ultimately get to the point in time where political parties wouldn't even think of running on an anti-hydrocarbon agenda if they wanted to get elected. Okay, so why is this important? Well, I like to say reason number one, it's the difference between recessions and depressions, because of course, a recession is when you're losing your job, and a depression is when I'm losing my job, and I feel this is very important because I could lose my job. But I think it's important for all of us to realize resources are 10% of the Canadian economy, but when we start to include the backward linkages to manufacturing, to construction, to clean tech, to high tech, et cetera, that it's actually 20% of our economy. And that, what that means is when we talk about Canadians being the best in the world at resource development, we're talking about the Royal Bank being the best in the world at lending to resource industries. So it's a broad impacts in our economy, which means it has impacts for all of our jobs and all of our families. But reason number two, I think it's important, is I think Canada is at an inflection point in its history. For 150 years, Canadians have been proud to be the junior partner who could always be accounted to punch above our weight when there's a global problem. First to Britain, then United States, ultimately the United Nations with peacekeeping, and to these days it seems like, or to whoever would want to have us as a junior partner, and we've seen our leader go to various places like India, and we know for sure India is not it. But we should realize, I think it's very important for us to realize it's not United States anymore either. The special relationship, if there ever was one, with the United States is ended with Obama, who canceled building XL pipeline, which our country really needed, and with Trump, who has reopened NAFTA. And I want to point out, I don't think Trump has even still had a state visit to Ottawa, and of course we've known for a long time it's traditionally the very first state visit by a U.S. president, and he still hasn't been there. So I think we need to realize Americans assume that Canadians stand up for themselves, just like they do. And they are more than happy to continue to buy our oil and gas at below market rates if we're willing to continue to sell it to them. And we're not a junior partner who they're going to take care of because they're our senior partner. They're expecting us to stand up for ourselves in the world. And so I think right now, after 150 years, it is our chance to stand up and be a senior partner in the world. Countries like Norway do it, Denmark, Switzerland, Belgium, these are all countries that stand up for themselves, and there's no reason why a country as big as and as successful as ours couldn't too. And I think by standing up as a senior partner, we'll take advantage of what our core competitive advantages are in the world, and that is massive resources with very few people to use them, our world-leading environmental technology and practices, our reliability as an honest, trustworthy, responsible supplier, and our geographic position with the shortest trade routes to 3 of the 4 world's largest economies. So I believe we have to win this culture war against oil and gas and resources because Canada is consequential to the world. We have what the world wants. And so while the 20th century belonged more to our senior partners, there is no reason why the 21st century can't belong to Canada as a senior country selling our valuable resources to the highest bidder who's happy to have us as an honest and reliable supplier. Well, there's one reason, actually. As international nice guys, we haven't figured out how to stand up to the Tides Foundation and their zealots. And the result is a private sector that can't move forward mega projects to the point where the government even had to nationalize a pipeline or face the consequences of no pipeline at all. So these opponents, they're winning. They're still winning. And what that means is that we're still losing. And so analyzing our opponents, and Joan Crockett's here, I was talking to her earlier, so she will attest that this is a long presentation just in itself. And so I'm going to do it in one slide here. And that is goals from a document from the Rockefeller Foundation, but it's a part of a large network of US NGOs that have been funding and networking a campaign here in Canada. And the goals on that page there, which I'll let you read, I guess it's a bit far to read, but I'll just take my word for it. They had a strategic plan of 5 goals, and that document comes from 2008. So I can remember in 2008, I was not, as an oil and gas person, not even remotely worried about the future of the oil and gas business in Alberta. In fact, I thought I was about to embark on the commercialization of a giant natural gas discovery in Quebec, which Germain was alluding to in his presentation. But here we are 10 years later, and they've achieved 4, and you could argue that they're making progress on their 5th. 4 out of those 5 strategic goals, and our mega project in Quebec was stopped, but so have been several others. LNG plants have been stopped. Several pipeline projects have been stopped. All of it relative to this campaign that they've been running. So industry is more knowledgeable about these issues, and we have, in spite of their being very well funded, we still have more money. So why are we losing? And I really believe it's because they've been much smarter about the way they organize and fund their campaign. So what should we do? Well, the first step is, I think we have to stop debating their question. Their question is, are hydrocarbons a necessary evil that are damaging the world's environment, and that we should be trying to transition off in some reasonable period of time as technology allows? Or are hydrocarbons just plain evil, and we should be leaving them in the ground right now in a LEAP manifesto because the end is nigh, we have only 12 years to live. So we, in the industry, we've dutifully taken up, and I think a lot of us have dutifully taken up, well, that's their question, we're going to debate it. Well, I know which side of that argument I'm on. I'm on the necessary evil side. People need to be practical. People need to realize the technology's not there just yet. People need to realize how many jobs are at stake. People need to realize that it's going to take time to do this transition. So we've taken that side. The problem with that, and I've talked to people in industry about it, is for those people in the room who understand the concept of Overton windows and what's allowed in polite conversation, all public policy decisions, at least that come to the attention of the public, are always settled within the Overton window. And the public, when they look at 2 sides of a debate, they look at one side, they look at the other side, they think, well, I kind of more believe this person or I kind of more believe that person. But at some point in time, they don't have the time to know the details themselves. So they decide, well, I'm going to go a little more this way or a little more that way. So that means the decision is going to be between necessary evil and just plain evil, which we've conceded the debate by conceding the question. And as I've pointed out to people in the oil and gas industry, even if we were able to win the debate completely and to convince the vast majority of Canadians that we were not just 80% right or partly right, even if we were considering that we were 100% right, that we should be transitioning off when we can, when we go to the public and say, well, we'd like to build a 50-year pipeline, it creates a disconnect. Well, you yourselves have said that we should be transitioning when we can. What would we possibly need a 50-year pipeline for? What would we possibly need a 100-year oil sands development for? We're clearly not going to be using oil and gas maybe 20 years from now, let alone 50 or 100. So there's the consequences of accepting your opponent's question. And I can tell you, I was in Quebec, and I sat in meetings where TCPL came in and started the meeting off. We understand the need for transition, but in the short term, we need this pipeline. Well, as I say, you've lost before you started. So our network is talking about how do we change the question, and that we need a message, and that message also needs to be a better self message. And by what I mean is that all of us, to some extent, have a real self and a better self, and we all know that about ourselves. There's the person that we wish we were, or think we are, and then there's the person we really are. So the example I always use is organic butter. So if I'm a parent and they're talking with school that all the kids should be able to have organic butter in their sandwiches, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that sure makes a lot of sense. I think that's absolutely right. All kids should be able to have that organic butter. I agree with that. And then I go to the grocery store and I see the organic butter is $7 and the regular butter is $4, and so I pick the regular butter. So there's the real self and better self, right? And real self messages, they control a lot of our behavior, but they don't inspire us. And our opponents have got a better self message. We're going to save the planet. They don't have a great real message. It comes without a job, by the way, right? But they have a great, better self message. Of course I want to save the planet. Of course I want organic butter for kids. So we've come back with real self messages. The way I like to say it is that the opponents say the oil and gas industry only cares about money, and our response is yes, but you don't understand how much money it is. We're really big, and it's a really important economy. But of course, all we're doing is reinforcing that your product is evil and it's destroying the planet, and our answer is yes, but what about the economy and what about the jobs? Or as I've said to Tim McMillan, until we come up with a message that I can't use for the cocaine industry, we're not there yet. So our argument is a better self message of that Canadians are the best in the world, that your life is better with hydrocarbons, and that your life is better with arguments because of this modern miracle argument of what it's done for people. And I'll just try to quickly go through this, but hopefully this is intuitive to most people, that our education opportunities are better, our health outcomes and life expectancy is better, infant mortality is dramatically better. There are basically 6.5 billion people on the world today that wouldn't be here without access to affordable energy like hydrocarbons. Some things that maybe you haven't thought about: equality. Hydrocarbons and affordable energy have made us much, much more equal. And I'll just say that really since the Reformation, since the Industrial Revolution, we've now got, in terms of enlightened societies, one of the first that isn't like Greece that had no running water, but it did have running slaves. And we don't have running slaves or a slave-based economy anymore because machines and energy does that work for us today. It's been enormously beneficial for making people equal. Economic benefits, I think we understand, but resources is the highest value add in the economy per worker. That's why people are well paid. The other thing is to think about, people think, resources make you not diversified, but Japan has much the same things that we can do. They have high tech, they have manufacturing, they have import, they have export. What they don't have is resources. How is our economy not more diversified? Because we have oil and gas and resources, which often ends up being counter-cyclical to those other industries. So in a portfolio theory, actually makes us a more diversified economy, not a less diversified economy. And the last one I'll speak to is mobility and safety. I'm a recent grandfather. Last year you had to be a grandfather to get in here, didn't you? Grandmother? Yeah. I'm a recent grandfather, so I feel very welcome here. But the idea of taking my kids to Disneyland, or grandkids to Disneyland, that seems pretty attractive to me. And the very idea that I can do that so easily is a big benefit. I don't want to give that benefit up. So I just want to speak then to a bit the impacts. Say, well, if we decide to ban the benefits, these miraculous benefits, or the impacts, we'll end up banning those benefits. And so what's the alternative solution? And for me, it's innovation and technology. And I'll just use this quick example. When I was young in Calgary, there was 600,000 people. Today, there's 1.2 million people. And I can tell you from personal experience, the air and water is cleaner today than it was then. Absolutely, for sure. To give you some statistical backup for that, Ross McKittrick has been studying these statistics. He says, do you realize that Environment Canada has been closing down air quality environmental monitoring sites in Canada because they've been reading zero for so long? Right? We've had So I think the solution for me is why not just keep the benefits? Why not have a better balanced energy diet? And why not focus on the idea that if we've had that kind of progress in just one, and I guess I might be old enough to say a bit more than a generation, but about one generation, why would we not think we'd have at least that kind of progress in the next generation? Okay, so we think the world needs more Canada. The world's going to 9 billion people in 2050 and maybe 12 billion by 2100. It's going to need more energy, not less. And that energy produced to the best standards in the world is what the world is going to need more of. Our view is it should be the very last barrel or 1,000 cubic feet of gas taxed, not the first. We think Canadian hydrocarbons are better for social justice reasons, the responsibility of our society, the highest environmental standards, lowest embedded emissions, and we have to realize if that energy for those 9 billion and 12 billion people doesn't come from here, it's going to come from somewhere else. The other thing I would say is that TAP's done some polling on this, and if you poll people internationally, it's not just people in Quebec who would prefer to get their oil from Canada. It turns out if you poll people in China, they'd rather get their oil from Canada than almost anywhere else. It turns out most places would rather get their oil from Canada than anywhere else. And it begs the question, why don't Canadians think that too? Okay, so our message at Modern Miracle Network is, if they're saying save the planet, our message basically is Canadians are the best in the world, and we are saving the planet. We're saving the planet by exporting resources produced to the best standards in the world. We think life's better with Canadian hydrocarbons. We think we're the best in the world. We think more Canada's resources are actually saving the planet. We think that First Nations do support resource development as they should, as probably the only practical way to end on-reserve poverty. And the other point I'd make to that innovation and technology point, the oil and gas industry in Canada spends as much on environmental protection technology as every other industry combined. Not just more than another industry, more than every other industry combined. Get that from CAP. Okay, so what can you do in terms of these messages? Well, you can become part of the network, and you can be part of the conversation. And on this, when we talk about the public voices and private voices, and just to talk a little bit about the difference between a private and a public conversation, some of us in this room have public conversations, and those kinds of conversations are what we have especially in Anglo-Saxon society. We have an oppositional system. We have a government and we have an opposition. In a debate, there is a for and there is a con. In a court, there is a prosecutor and there is a defense lawyer. This is not true in every culture, but it's certainly very true of our culture. That's how we get to the truth, is by hearing both sides and trying to decide what the truth is. But what that means is when you're having a public conversation, you're not actually talking to the person that you're having it with. The government is not talking to the opposition. The opposition is not talking to the government. They're talking to the people listening. The defense lawyer and the prosecutor are not talking to each other. They're trying to convince the judge. We've never seen in court where the prosecutor goes, "Man, that was such a good point. The defense is clearly right." Like, this doesn't happen, right? It's the judge who decides. You put up both sides and let somebody decide. So that's a public conversation, and it's a whole different way of speaking than if you're having a private conversation where you're actually talking to the person that you're talking to. I mean, we all understand this when we're talking to our spouses, for example, or our children. Public-style conversations don't work. When we're arguing with our friends and family about hydrocarbons, it doesn't work either, because you're now talking to that person, not some third party. And a private conversation has to be done in a different way, and I just want to go through a little bit about that, because this is directed a little bit about engaging you as private voices. So we'll go So the first step in a private conversation, as I'm actually talking to somebody else, is to establish the narrative, and I think this is really important. We enter into most conversations about oil and gas with the other person thinking they have the moral high ground. They care about the planet, right? So we have to start that conversation off, and this is borrowed to some extent from Alex Epstein, so he's a great source to go to if you want to get more details on this. But the first one, establish the narrative that what you care about is people. I care about my family, I care about my community, I care about my country, I care about humanity, and I'm looking at this from the point of view what's best for people. And by the way, a very good natural environment is very good for people, but so is a good social environment, and so is a good economic environment, also very good for people. That's the people, planet, profits approach. And the important thing about this is you may find, and I think this is true of a lot of opponents who say, well, you know what, I'm sorry, it's actually lemurs that I care about. I don't like people much, I care about lemurs more. Well, you can say, good, well then, thank you. We're having Thanksgiving dinner, well, it's time to pass the cranberry sauce, because we have nothing left to talk about, because you're coming from a completely different moral point of view than I am. I'm coming from the point of view what's good for people. You think lemurs are more important. Isn't that interesting to find that out about my cousin? But we're not, no need to continue this conversation, right? But assuming that people are saying, no, I care about the planet because I care about people too, then the next step of this conversation is don't try to convince, persuade, or debate, or argue. That's for public conversations. Tell them how you changed your mind. Right? So what changed your mind of oil and gas? My very quick story is that I started off in the high-tech industry. And it's a long story about how I ended up in oil and gas, but I'll tell you what I have learned is that when people say we got to stop hewing wood and drawing water, I've now realized, well, just a second, if you're the world's best at it, using world-leading technologies, there might be nothing wrong with hewing wood and drawing water, because in my experience, oil and gas is more high-tech than the high-tech industry that I was in. And that's what it's also changed my mind about oil and gas. It's changed my mind about the idea that we'll ever run out of it. It's changed my mind about that it's actually bad for the planet. I think if you produce it well, we're actually doing great things for the planet. It's changed my mind about all of that because I believe in that innovation and technology story. But for everybody, you have your own story about this is what changed my mind. There's a powerful message there. One is that you're not arguing, debating. The other one is, well, if you change your mind, maybe they could change their mind, right? And then from that point, it might engender a conversation. It might not if it gets to an impasse. Well, then the best thing to do is say, well, you know what? We're talking from different points of view. Here's a reference. Maybe you could tell them about Patrick Moore's book, or you could talk about Alex Epstein's book, or you could talk about our Canadian Energy Network that we've set up just to give people all the points and counterpoints and memes and videos. And I hope you'll consider going there and checking it out. And at the end of the day, also, I think it's fair to, having established the moral high ground, to say, hey, you know what, or as it says on my Twitter feed, just because I'm biased doesn't mean I'm wrong, and just because you think you're right doesn't mean your sources aren't biased. And I don't think it hurts to question some of the sources that your cousin or family is using. So that's that. I have another one here, just some practical tactics on this, which really addresses more or less the same points, but I'm saying I've got about maybe 5 minutes left, so I'm going to skip that slide. And then the last thing is take action. So this is something that we can get to you, but and we're hoping you'll go to modernmiraclenetwork.org. For those people who are bored of me looking at your phone, do it right now. Go to modernmiraclenetwork.org. For anybody else, I'll give you permission to pull your phone out, but sign up for our emails, etc. But this is our 12-step program, and that's a 12-step program on purpose, because we do need to recognize we've got a problem. We do need to change what we're doing. But this is 12 steps of what you can do differently, and it really just starts off with a simple thing. Start following leaders, whether it's Modern Miracle Network, but there's Canadian Energy, there's Energy Citizens, there's Canada Action, there's Vivian Krause, there's Patrick Moore. There's a lot of people who are talking out there who are leaders on energy. And once you start listening and following them, go find out who they are following, and you'll get into yourself a whole network. I can tell you we've got over 80 public voices from coast to coast in this country now with positive campaigns on hydrocarbons. So follow that on social media. Step one, that's not that hard unless you're not on social media. The other one is, the next step is, well, hey, be brave enough to actually share that content. And I know what's going to happen. Some people are going to some of your friends are going to say, well, how could you be that? Don't you care about the planet? Are you an evil person? Well, then hopefully you're now armed to start having that private conversation on social with your social media network as well. And if you get to the end of that 12 steps, we've got 12 more steps for you because you've just became an energy leader. Okay, so here's our deal. Our deal is if you go there and you sign up and you decide that you donate us money, we're not going to do anything. What we're going to do is we're going to help connect you in with our network so that you can do something. So that we think that's a fantastic deal that you give us money so we can help you do something. But that's the whole point of a network campaign, because when we think about what everybody knows about oil and gas is only because everybody says it. It doesn't make it true. And if we can just get everybody to start saying what's true, and if everybody is saying that Canadians are the best in the world, well, then everybody will know that too. Thank you.
We've got time for a couple of questions. Norm?
I'm going to take the first one.
Okay.
Agreed with all of that. The only question is that you talked about how positive it was, or maybe the lesser evil. I think you should take out that lesser evil in your one slide, because it's a positive.
I love that. I love Paul. He's 100% convinced. On my new question of is it a modern miracle or potentially a necessary evil, he's 100% convinced. So there we go. Check mark.
What is really missing, I travel east a lot, and nobody understands how we make it, like how we make Alberta the most environmentally responsible oil production anywhere in the world. And I've been involved as a geophysicist, I'm a professional geophysicist, for 45, 46 years now. So I've gone right through the whole thing. And what is really missing is some instruction, like to educate people by having people like me come in and talk about how the whole process from where we first get hold of a piece of land, all the government regulations, how we do seismic, all the government regulations, how we drill wells, how everything is controlled, how there's checks and balances and 100% or 200% redundancy on every safety measure. And then that's the oil industry. We're finished. When the oil industry is finished, it goes to the oil business. And the oil business is the one that you don't like because it makes all the money and the profits and all of that. So try and separate the oil business from us oil industry people.
Well, I just on that one, I get this point. I mean, if only everybody knew what we knew, then there wouldn't be an issue. But I think we have to be very realistic about people in different places whose lives depend on a job in a manufacturing business or a distribution business in Ontario or Quebec or somewhere else. And you know, Preston Manning talks, I think, very correctly and eloquently about sender-based communication versus receiver-based communication. And of course, in Alberta, and we see it with a lot of groups here, and CAP is one of the most guilty ones of this, of doing sender-based communication. I just need to educate you on what we know, and everything would be great. But what that misses is that the receiver goes, I'm not interested. I'm just simply not interested. I've got maybe 6 minutes a week for politics, and you've just taken up too many of them. So we need to then look and say, well, what is it that those people in their day-to-day lives who are busy commuting back and forth to work in Toronto, more worried about getting their kids to hockey than what's happening in Alberta, oil and gas workers or oil and gas business, either one. And we have to find messages that they can feel good about being Canadians because of our industry, and that's where I'll go back to. I think the message that says that Canadians are the best in the world, we are saving the planet by being the best in the world, and we should be proud of that, and we can all be proud of that, is a better message than, do you see how many jobs we're creating, and do you see how good our technology is? Because they're not going to be interested. I'm interested.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say on that note, we have a new video that says we're competing in the Oil Olympics, and we're asking people to get on board with Team Canada Oil, Gas, and Oil Sands, which I think is kind of an effective approach because people do love the Olympics. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention about how people are ignorant of the use of oil. There's a tweet that Andrew Weaver put out that said, I don't use oil in my daily life because I drive an EV. This is a guy who lives on an island. He's a PhD. He's a very smart guy. But he thinks he doesn't use oil.
Michelle Sterling, by the way, Friends of Science, great public voice. There's an example of somebody to follow on social media and share her work.
One more question. Got one more question. Maybe everybody's as hungry as me. Gordon?
Just going to say, as you travel around the world to developing countries, it is very exciting, Michael, to see people using propane instead of wood or dung. Exactly. And the benefit is in their personal lives is phenomenal.
On receiver-based information and presentation, I couldn't agree more. However, part of their receiver-based information is also bad-mouthing us, telling us how awful we are. In fact, they are awful for what they want to do to the people of this world through their ideas about policy. Should we not be getting that into the message? And if so, how should we go about that?
Well, there's a public conversation about that. If it's some person I don't know on Twitter, I'm going to answer what you just said completely differently than if I'm having it with a friend or family or whatever. If it's a friend or family, I think you have to start to say, well, okay, I understand where you're coming from. You think we're destroying the planet and so on and so forth. But just a second, for me, it's about that I care about people, community, and humanity. And what's really changed my mind about what you're talking about is here, my story you heard, your story could be different. So there's the answer to that, to not have that confrontational thing, because you're trying to persuade that person to actually think about what they just said. If it's a public conversation, I think we have to do a lot more of what our opponents do, which is to, in every political campaign, undermining and attacking your opponents is a very effective strategy, right? So they've been very effective at doing that to us, and I don't think that it would hurt at all to point out there's a lot of biases from the other side in terms of looking for taxpayer subsidized direct subsidies to create windmill parks or solar parks. As I said, I'm in favor of renewables, but that doesn't necessarily make me in favor of our taxpayers having to guarantee it. And we don't hear at all about or we don't hear enough about some of the environmental impacts of windmills, and we also don't hear about a lot of the hidden costs of what's the cost of all the offtake regulations that force you to take power whether you want it or not, and what does that do to the operations of the grid, and how much money is that costing us in our base charges. If you start to look into those details, you'll find this stuff is a lot more expensive than we're being told, and that's even after we're being told it's pretty expensive. So I think we need to definitely undermine, and Vivian Krause's work is doing a great job of showing the bias and the funding sources for these groups, and as is Joan Crockett's work in the elections. And I think we need to. You want to get into social networks, and you want to talk about getting those messages out there. I think we need to take those messages from Joan and from Vivian and make sure everybody hears. It's not just us who are biased because we make a living from it. They're biased too, and they're also making a lot of money from it.
Let's call that good. I've got this. We're supper time, so thank you very much. Is that good?
I think it was pretty darn good.
I think it was really good.
Okay.
Give them a warm welcome. Thank you very much.